we do have a special guest presenter from Residential Energy Services by the name of Paul Shenton on the call today. So he's going to be talking to us for the next 30 minutes on really how we can save energy and money in our own homes. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, but he has asked if we can hold questions to the end like we normally do, and then we can have probably like a 15-minute sort of wrap up and answer any questions, ask any questions. Don't forget that previous presentations that we've had, like from the likes of Daikin around air source heat pumps, we have saved to the Climate and Sustainability Hub on the main Wickr homepage. So don't forget that you can always go back and watch some of those. So I think that's the general housekeeping. I just need to go through over to Paul, and I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, my name is Paul Shenton. I'm an energy advisor. I was a building contractor, retired building contractor, and then chose to retrain as an energy assessor with my knowledge of building properties, basically. My own property has got air source heat pump. It has solar panels, which I've had for 13 years. It's quite a low energy rated property, and really it's getting that message across to the rest of you to try and maybe give you some ideas how to save money, how to keep an eye on your bills. I do touch on what grants are available, the ways you can view your EPC, which we'll come on to later. EPC stands for Energy Performance Certificates. With my other hat on, I do work for several estate agents where I go and do EPCs for people that are selling their properties. As you probably realise, every domestic property does have to have an energy performance certificate. These tend to last for 10 years. So if you move into a house that's already got one, that is fine, but it may well expire during the time that you're living in the property. So when you come to sell your property, you will need an updated EPC, Energy Performance Certificate. Government are getting quite hot on now when it comes to energy performance, all this stress we've had with Ukraine, etc., energy prices going up through the roof, and we had the £400 help from the government. They're tending to focus a lot more now on properties in the UK and trying to improve the energy efficiency of those properties. Essentially, it's a fabric first approach. What these grants are targeted to doing is to actually look at the actual fabric of your building. So the building comes in, essentially we all live in essentially a box, whether that's a flat, detached house, terrace house, whatever. We have to consider essentially three items. We've got the floor to consider, we have the walls, and we have the roof, the ceiling. The floor, there's very little we can do when it comes to floor. All we can do there, it's a massive job to retrofit, energy assess a property. When it comes to doing the floor, we can't start taking floors up. It's a very expensive exercise. So all we can recommend when it comes to floors, make sure that if you have got carpet, you've got good quality underlay, and make sure all gaps underneath skirting boards are all well sealed to prevent any drafts if you've got suspended timber floors. There are retrofitting ways of insulating your floor by utilising insulation between joists if you've got a timber floor, but most people's properties tend to have a concrete floor. Any house built before sort of 1975 won't have any insulation under the concrete slab. So we lose around about 15% of our energy through the floor. Modern day properties now have a lot of insulation underneath the concrete slab, so that does tend to reduce energy loss in the floor significantly. When it comes to the walls, obviously wall construction has changed over the time. Some properties I go into now are 9-inch solid walls. They tend to be the most inefficient walls when it comes to energy loss. There is no cavity, in other words, a gap in between the two skins. It is just solid brickwork. And the way you can sort of find out about whether your house has got 9-inch walls or cavity walls is by looking at the construction on the outside. As you can see the image there, hopefully you can see a sort of stretcher bond there. That normally infers that you've got two skins of brick or block with a cavity. If you see on that picture there at the lower left side, the sort of end of the brick, that usually tends to mean that you've got solid 9-inch walls, in which case it just is a solid brick and is a very high U value, which means there's a lot of energy going through your walls. The key part of energy loss is how much of an external wall you have. So for example, if you live in a terrace property with just a small front wall and a small back wall that's exposed to the air, then you will have much more efficient when it comes to energy performance than if you live in a big detached house with a lot of exterior walls. It makes sense, obviously. When it comes to retrofitting or doing anything with a 9-inch wall, we are limited to what we can do. Basically, there's internal wall insulation and external wall insulation, known as EWI or IWI. The internal wall insulation is essentially plasterboard with an insulated with insulation stuck on the inside of the plasterboard, sometimes framed out. So what that does, it will reduce the size of your rooms internally, which obviously there is a cost to that, because you also have to extend window sills, you have to extend, take the skirting boards off, move those. Obviously it has to be replastered, and window sills and electric cables particularly have to be extended out. So again, it's quite intrusive when it comes to insulating from the inside. Recently, in the last 10 probably years or so, we've gone to EWI, external wall insulation. Now, this doesn't work for everybody, but this is an incredibly efficient way of insulating your 9-inch wall. And that comes around by actually putting laths on the outside of the wall and actually applying up to a 3 or 4 inch thick insulation board with a rendered finish that fits on the outside. But again, with that, you will get issues with the overhanging eaves, which will have to be extended. Any rainwater pipes will have to be extended, and so with the window sills as well. So again, it's quite an expensive exercise, but that does improve the U value or the efficiency of that wall up to a standard of a standard cavity wall. So it does make a massive difference. When it comes to the roof, the insulation in the roof, I stick my head above a lot of people's loft hatches now when I'm measuring insulation, and 9 times out of 10, and probably you know yourself, as soon as you pop your head above the loft, people store their Christmas decorations, their children's stuff. They put decking on the top of the ceiling joists. What that does, it's great because you've got that extra storage. But if you've got decent insulation in that loft and you're putting boards on top of those ceiling joists, you're compressing that insulation, and effectively you're losing the effect of that insulation. So it is very frustrating for me when I see that, and also particularly when I lift the loft hatch and realize there's no insulation actually on the loft hatch, just a piece of plywood, because the heat will just disappear straight through that ceiling. So it's very important that you insulate that loft hatch. But also, if you do get the opportunity, if you have got a clear loft, and there isn't many people with clear lofts, add insulation. It's the quickest fix, and it can save you anything up to £350 a year by having a properly insulated loft. Insulation depth now for a standard new property is almost 10 inches deep. So you can imagine, most people, when I survey, I've done one this morning actually, they had literally 3 inches of loft insulation, but they boarded on the top. So effectively they've just got 3 inches of insulation. So they are losing a lot of energy by not insulating properly their loft hatch. There are ways around adding additional insulation in the loft. You can get these what's known as stilts, which you can pick up from B&Q and the like, which screw on the side of the ceiling joist, which will raise the level, allowing you to put a deck at a higher level, giving you that gap underneath that decking to be able to put additional insulation. So that's a good fix. It's not easy to do, but if you do get the opportunity to do that, you still want to sort of maintain that deck so you've got room for Christmas decorations, etc., then that's a well worth exercise. So insulation in the loft is very important. It's the easiest fix. We all know hot air rises, so when you've got your heating on in winter, it will just disappear through your ceiling as quick as anything. So out of your pound, and this is important to note, out of your £1 worth of energy, you're only getting the benefit in the average UK property of 35 pence worth of energy out of that £1. So 65p for the average UK house is disappearing through your walls, your floors and your ceiling. Now that's based on a completely hermetically sealed box. I do understand that, but there's still an awful lot of energy that we're losing. So the more we can retain that energy in, the lower your boiler temperature, radiator temperatures can be to maintain an adequate temperature downstairs. I've also come across spray foam insulation in the loft as well, which scares me a little bit, I have to say. A lot of people have had this done, and I've actually come across clients that have had to have it removed before they can get a mortgage when people are buying their property. I don't see the advantage of insulating their pitched roof. Basically, what they're doing is they're putting spray foam between their rafters, but not necessarily insulating their ceiling. So what they're ending up with is a warm loft We don't live in the loft, we live in the bedroom. It's important to insulate the part of the loft that is in touch with the floors below. So by insulating between the rafters, keeps the heat in the loft, but we don't want that heat in the loft. We want it downstairs. And also it does have an effect on the joists as well. It can cause moisture problems in those joists. So spray foam insulation, I would tend to steer away from, absolutely, and try and increase your insulation in your loft as much as you possibly can. When it comes to, so that's the fabric essentially. We've got to make sure we've got good quality windows. Most properties I survey now tend to have composite doors, but also have UPVC windows with a decent gap. You can go to triple glazing, but that's expensive exercise to do. All windows and doors now tend to have vents on them as well, and we'll come on to ventilation in a second. Ventilation is very important, but also when you're having drafts in the house, make sure that the arms are lifted up on your composite doors. And what that does, it brings the door into the rubber seal around the frame and will stop any draft coming through your door. So sort of get used to closing the door and lifting the arm up. Particularly keep the windows on vent when you have to. And I will come on to ventilation. Ventilation is critical in a property. So it takes 4 times more energy to heat up moist air. So if you can imagine a shower and people are having a shower and you've got all those water particles in the air, the surface area of that water is significantly more than clean air. So the heat required to raise that 1 degree is 4 times more. So by what we need to do, and I know this is probably counterintuitive, but to make sure we ventilate our house right through, first thing in the morning to actually open the windows, get the moist air out, close the doors and windows then, and then your air temperature will increase a lot faster by having clean dry air than having moist air in the air from showers and kettles and everything else. So ventilation is key part to a building, and good ventilation will also prevent mold and moss as well. So that's another issue that you should consider. But ventilation is key. I believe on the continent, particularly in Germany, they have almost a ritual every morning to open all the doors and windows to clear the sort of dirty air out, or the moist air out, actually, every morning. And then they're left with an air pocket essentially that's clean and dry, and that will heat up a lot faster utilizing your boiler's heating controls. When it comes to your radiators, your heating system, most people have gas. Most people are on the gas network, although we are moving over to air source heat pumps, of which I believe you've had a talk with Daikin. But I say most people have composite boilers now. When they come in, when they are new, they're not always set. So sometimes you'll find the boiler temperature, and this is not the room temperature, the boiler temperature is set very high. And some people forget to actually turn that down. So a standard boiler will come in with a high temperature of about 80, 82. It's up to the actual heating engineer to turn that temperature down. So when you get home tonight, just check the boiler temperature. If it's banging out at sort of 80, 85, it's burning unnecessary gas. That should be between 60 and 65. So you're burning less gas, but still getting the same amount of heat efficiency from that boiler. So make sure if you've had a recently new boiler, just check that boiler temperature is around between 60 and 65. That's the maximum it needs to be. Any higher than that, it's unnecessary burning of fuel. So that's an important measure. When it comes to keeping that heat inside the house, very important. You've got your radiators on the walls. Obviously, all radiators are sited usually on external walls. And it's important that we can reflect that heat back into the room. They do these sort of space blanket type things now that drop down the back of the radiator, that hook on these sort of brackets that secure the radiator to the wall. They are very good for reflecting heat back in the room, and they're only about £8 to £10 a piece. Well worth investing in those. That way then your heat, instead of going into your walls, it will actually come back into the room. So utilizing all that the heat that the boiler is burning, and it will bounce it into the room where the heat is actually required. The other thing, a lot of people don't necessarily, particularly when we had the issue with the crisis, everybody turned their heating off. They then went out to work, they came home at night, they banged it up to maximum, had a couple of hours heat, and then turned it off again because they thought that was it. That's all I can afford. I'm not having my heating on. And they had scarves and coats on and everything else when it went very high. That really is counterproductive. What you should be doing, and it's working out at least no more expensive to have the heat on long and low throughout the day. And you'll say, why should I do that when nobody's in the house? And it is keeping the fabric of the walls warm. I go in many houses and I feel the walls and they are freezing cold. So what happens at night when you've come in and you've not had the heating on during the day, it first needs to heat those walls. What we want to do is to try and have the heating on long and low for say 16 degrees or something like that, and then have it coming up a little bit for when you come in at night from work. That way then it maintains the temperature within the fabric of the building, and you don't have to sort of heat the walls first before heating yourself. And overall, over a long period of time, it's proved that it's been no more expensive to do that than to turn it on, bang it on at 80 degrees for 2 hours at night before you go to bed, or 3 or 4 hours before you go to bed. So if you can look at your central heating when it does come on, when the temperatures do drop outside, have it on long and low, keep it on 15, 16 degrees. And then when you come in at night, it just set it for increasing the temperature to whatever comfortable temperature you want, 20 degrees, whatever. Everybody's got a different tolerance when it comes to heat. But yeah, that's the best way of utilizing your boiler and getting the most out of your central heating system for your house. So longer and lower. Most people also have thermostatic radiator valves now, so you can individually set temperatures to per each radiator. That's always a plus in the EPC. So if somebody's got TRVs, we call them thermostatic radiator valves on each radiator, you can adjust. And it's also important, make sure those radiators upstairs are set at a lower temperature, because obviously they will benefit from the heat from downstairs anyway. So keep the temperature a couple of degrees lower up in the bedrooms than you've got it maybe downstairs in the lounge, living areas, etc., etc. Always check your meters as well. I've come across this twice now, where I've gone to a meter where somebody's had a smart meter installed, and I'll touch on smart meters. That's something else I've just been reminded. But smart meters, it's very important that you check your bill and your number, your meter number, which is unique to you. Check your bill against the meter number on your actual meter against your bill. Make sure those two numbers are the same. I've had two instances now where people have had a new smart meter installed. The gas company have forgot to lodge those meter numbers, and they've continued to invoice based on imperial measurements rather than metric measurements. So imperial gas was measured by cubic feet. Now it's measured in cubic meters, and the factor is a factor of 9, believe it or not. So it was actually my mum had a bill for £1,000 when a bill should have only been about £100. Yeah, we certainly sat up when we saw that, and we realized what it was. It was purely the meter number. They hadn't changed the meter. So the number they thought was cubic meters was actually cubic feet, or the other way around, basically. So always check your meter number against the meter number on the bill. That's also very important. If you know people, or people like yourself potentially, that have long-term health issues, or elderly, you may have elderly relatives that should be on the priority services register, make sure that they are on that priority services register. Register them with your, you can go on, type it into Google, find the priority services register. Basically what they're doing is they're registering that individual against their gas, their water, and their electricity. So if there's ever going to be any work being carried out on any of the mains work, they will get notified first, and they tend to prioritize those people, the elderly and vulnerable people maybe that have got things important to them, disabled people with hoists and things like that in the property, which is important to have electricity. They prioritize those people first when it comes to reconnecting properties. So anybody that thinks that they may know somebody that's that maybe would benefit from that, the priority services register is very important. To register those people, then they will get updated information and text messages if the electricity or even the water is going to be cut off for a period of time, and they will also prioritize them getting back on the system when it comes to reconnecting. So I touched on the solid wall. I've just remembered I didn't touch on the cavity wall. So cavity wall started in sort of 1920, 1930, where we had two skins of brick with a gap in between. As we've gone through the tens of years into the 70s, we went onto a thermal block on the in-skin, and then we went onto insulation and a thermal block, and now we're onto a much thicker internal block and very thick insulation with an additional cavity. So the actual modern walls now are up to 340 mil thick, very, very efficient, very low on moisture and incredibly efficient when it comes to the EPC. So when I do an EPC on a house that's a reasonably modern house, it usually comes out considerably higher because they've got cavity wall insulation. Now, not everybody will have cavity wall insulation. So houses back to 1930 up to 1970, where you just had a gap in between the skins of anything up to sort of 70 mil, some people would have had cavity wall insulation, which tends to be pumped from the outside. The way you can tell if your property yourself has actually had any insulation, if you actually look closely on the bricks. Now on that particular image there, you've got some holes drilled into the brickwork. That's not quite right, because that's actually a damp course. But you will see on the corners where the bricks meet each other, sometimes you'll see a hole that's been pointed up, and that usually will tend to mean that you've had external cavity wall. And on my EPC, when I come along and look at your house and I see those holes that have been pointed up, I will put filled cavity. So I will treat that as having cavity wall insulation. So that's very important, just to check to see if you've had cavity wall insulation, because that does make a significant difference to your EPC level. So when I go into your house and I assess the EPC rating, the average EPC for the UK is 60 out of 100. It goes from 0 to 100, with 100 being absolute best, essentially a hermetically sealed box. And it's also rated in groups of 10. So for example, G0 to 10 is a G, going right the way up to A, which is 100 down to 95. So it also goes from A to G as well as from 1 to 100. So the average for the UK is a D60. Now, I don't know about you, I didn't like getting Ds at school, but apparently the UK's housing stock is pretty poor when it comes to energy efficiency. So most properties I'm doing now are Ds and Es, E properties, which essentially means they are okay, but not brilliant. My house, very fortunate, I've spent a lot of money on energy insulation methods, and mine is actually up to a B, but I've got no chance of actually achieving an A. There are a few properties in this country that are A's, but they are essentially almost off-grid properties that are generating their own energy. Very, very modern house, very, very energy efficient. But we can improve our EPC. So if you go onto the government register now, you will see, you can type in government, find my EPC, and you can have a look at your EPC. Now, it may well not be up to date, but and you may well not have one as well. If you've lived at your house for over 10 years, you may not have one at all. But if you've moved, say, in the last 5 or 6 years, you will have usually a reasonably recent EPC. And that will tell you what the energy performance, and basically what it does, it assesses all the lighting in the house, how much LED lighting you've got, how thick your insulation is, whether you have cavity wall insulation, the date of the property, because what it does with the date of the property, if I say your house is built in 1930, it attributes the building regulations to 1930. Whereas if your house was built in 1970, it will give you a slightly better rating with your walls, because obviously over time, energy performance, bricks and blocks have got better, and I've got better insulation qualities. So I date the property, I make sure I measure the insulation. The most important thing is the boiler, how old the boiler is. Some people still have back boilers behind the fires, which are very inefficient. Some people have storage radiators, the electric storage radiators, which again are very inefficient. Even though they are electric, they are incredibly inefficient and will mark your EPC down significantly. The other way of saving energy on your EPC is if you've got a secondary fire. So if I see a house with a gas central heating system, but also then has an open fire, possibly with a log burner, this may be great, but it marks your EPC down, because essentially what that can be doing is you could be having your heating on full blast, but also burning logs and coal, and that would be burning extra stuff into the atmosphere. So if there is secondary heating, it's classed as secondary heating, that would also mark your EPC down. If you notice, new properties now, they don't have any exterior fires at all. There's no chimneys in these new houses. They just purely rely on the radiator system, because they are sized for the rooms and will provide sufficient heat for each individual room. If you've got old chimneys that have been built up, again, that marks you down, because there is a void there, that it's cold. Windows, pretty well everybody now has double glazing now, so that's not a major issue at all. It's mostly the fabric of the building. If you've got solar panels, and I will come on to solar, solar has been brilliant over the years. I was very fortunate. I was MCS accredited 13 years ago, I installed my own solar at my house. That was a time when, if you recall, we had the feed-in tariff was incredibly generous. The government went in too high, was very generous with the feed-in tariff. It then, all the interest has been accruing over the years, and now I get a significant amount per kilowatt hour for generating. However, that's since stopped, but solar is still very efficient for actually saving energy. The average solar system now is around about £6,000–7,000 for a 2.5–3.5 kilowatt system. The solar panels are far better than mine. I had mine installed 13 years ago. I have 19 panels. That same kilowatt out rating of those 19 panels can be done with 7 panels now. That's how far forward we've come with solar panels. And if you've got solar panels where you've got the option to save that to a battery, batteries are expensive, but over a long term, there is a long payback with batteries, but it's nice to be able to store that energy that you've generated in the day and utilize that energy at night time when the sun goes in, essentially. As we all know, solar panels work on light. They don't work on heat. So they work on light, and they need to be in a clean, south facing ideally, but east-west is okay, with no overshading, so no trees particularly bringing the array down, no housing behind, because obviously when the sun is up high in the summer, that's fine, but when we get to autumn and winter, the sun is lower down, can cause shading from other properties. So it's important, if you've got a south or east-west facing roof, that you've got no shading. The solar panels are mounted very simply on the roof. It's quite easy to install them. They are screwed to the rafters, and then the tiles are brought down. There's only one part where the actual cables pass through the actual roof. I wouldn't suggest going for any rent-a-roof system. There's a lot of people that got ripped off with that years ago, where people said they would come in and put solar on them for free. You would get the energy and they would get the feed-in tariff. I believe there are companies still around now that will put solar on for you and cost you nothing. I would tend to steer away from there, because at the end of the day, they own those solar panels. So that means you can't do anything with your roof. And also, mortgage companies, when you come to sell the property, don't look favourably at all on those situations where other companies own those solar panels. In fact, one lady had to get a letter off that solar company to give them a letter saying that we own the solar panels. It cost her £4,000 for that one letter, because they knew they had her arm up her back, basically. So steer away from that. If you can finance them yourself, great. In my mind, they are a worthwhile exercise. They also add value to your property. They didn't 10 years ago, but now estate agents are looking at properties with solar and saying that house generates its own income. It generates maybe a couple of thousand kilowatt hours. It has got to be worth more than the exact house next door, because it generates money. So therefore, you will recover the cost of that when you come to sell your property, or a significant part of the infrastructure cost of putting solar on. So it's worthwhile in my personal view. When it comes to the solar itself, actually the amount of energy that it generates in DC current. It goes to your consumer unit. It converts it, the inverter goes to an inverter, which converts it to AC current. That cable goes into your consumer unit, and you utilize that energy if the sun is shining, or if it's light outside and the Hoover's on, the fridge is on. That energy is going, you're getting the priority of that energy first before it draws from the grid. If you're both out at work, or you're out at work and the sun is shining, it's generating a lot of energy on the roof. There's nowhere for it to go in the house other than maybe the fridge and the freezer that's on. It will go back down the national grid. And if you have a smart meter, if you press 9 twice on your smart meter, you will see the export tariff. And certain companies like Octopus and others will actually pay for you to export energy back to them. I currently get, I think, 15 pence to export a kilowatt hour of energy. I pay average 25 pence to bring it in. So every month I get a bill for my electricity taken off. I get that 15 pence a kilowatt hour taken off my bill. So throughout the spring and summer, my bills have been extremely low, down to about £15 a month. In addition, I get the feed-in tariff as well, but that doesn't apply now. But certainly well worth doing. You will get paid for that energy you export. If you don't export it, the other alternative would be to save it in a battery. But like I've touched on before, batteries can be quite expensive, maybe up to £2,000. But that way, then you're not sending anything back to the grid. It's all going to battery storage. And if you've got sufficient batteries, a flick of a switch when you come in at night, turn the TV on, that will be utilising that battery storage. And it's also ideally for charging cars as well overnight. Now more and more people are having electric cars. So that's another thing to consider. When it comes to the grants themselves, I will touch on the grants. The grants, at the moment, we're running Eco4 grants, we're running GBIS grants. The GBIS is Great British Insulation Scheme. There is no qualifying criteria for GBIS. It means anybody can get GBIS, Great British Insulation Scheme. If their property is less than, I believe, 90 square metres, they can receive top-up insulation completely free of charge. So what they'll look at their EPC and they'll see if it's a D or below. If your EPC is D or below, they will actually top up your insulation up to a maximum, I think, of 9 inches, 225. So if you've only got 3 inches of insulation, they will come along and add another, say, 6 inches of insulation on the top. But obviously, if you've got a deck like we talked about earlier, you would have to make sure that deck was removed, and obviously all the stuff would have to come out of the loft as well before they would do that. But that is a free system at the free service at the moment. So all properties D or below, with a room area, surface area of roof area of 94 square meters would qualify for GBIS. The big grant out there currently is Eco4. Eco4 stands for Energy Company Obligation. It is essentially the energy companies like Octopus and E.ON have had to chuck in billions of pounds into a pot, and the government has made them do this and said, right, you've got to provide this pot of money because we need to improve these houses, the worst performing houses. That doesn't mean to say the worst state houses. It could be beautiful detached houses, but they may be very, very badly insulated. So what they do is they look at the EPC of those poorly performing properties. So any property with an E, F or G rating would be looked at, and they would say, right, okay, this property potentially would qualify for a new boiler, qualify for insulation, qualify for cavity wall insulation. If they're off grid, in other words, if they're not on gas, they would qualify for solar panels and potentially air source heat pump as well. However, it then comes to the financial criteria, and currently at the moment it is 31,000 of net income. That's not gross, that's net income. So that's a gross of £40,000. So if somebody's got a decent job and is living on their own, essentially, potentially they could have this grant that would cost them absolutely nothing if their property is an EF or G property. So well worth considering. The majority of people having this done tend to be the elderly that haven't maybe got private pensions, that are just on state pension. I think the state pension is now £11,000-12,000. Obviously, 12,000, only 25,000. They're well within that budget, and they will actually qualify for energy measures if they have in less than 31,000. Doesn't matter on savings. You could have millions in the bank. It doesn't matter. It's the actual income to the property. So bear that in mind. It's not saving. Although they may ask for about savings, they actually don't take that into consideration when they come to weighing up a grant. The other route through would be a long-term health issue. That's people with a long-term health issue like COPD, heart condition. In other words, you need that property. If you're ill, you need that property to be warm and dry. So anybody with sort of vascular issues or health issues, as I say, COPD, asthma, things like that, would qualify automatically irrelevant of income. So that's another thing to consider as well. But myself and Residential Energy Service can help you with that. I didn't say at the start, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We've been given this grant by the government to go out into workplaces. We're not selling anything. We're not selling any insulation or anything like that. It's purely free advice for employees, essentially. That's what we're doing it for. So well worth having a look at Eco4. Well worth checking on GBIS. The other grant as well, which I will touch on because I see I'm just going over now, is the air source heat pump grant, which the government are desperate to get rid of 600,000 air source heat pumps a year. They're currently on about 70,000 a year. I had one 2 years ago done by Octopus, did a brilliant job. It saved me around about 200 quid a year on energy to start with, but the big thing is I got rid of all the gas. So I had one gas appliance, which we got rid of. So now I've had my gas disconnected, which is another saving of about £200 a year, because as you know, we all pay this daily charge, 65p I think for gas, 50p for electric or whatever it is, varies. So I've got rid of that, and it's been a really good decision. Obviously tied in with the solar panels as well, it makes my house a lot more efficient. But you have to have fairly well insulated house to actually have an air source heat pump, because it does use quite a bit of energy in the winter months. Obviously it doesn't use any the last 4 months because we've had it really warm outside. And the way an air source heat pump works, just touch on that, I'm sure you know, you open your fridge, it's cold, it's not really cold. What's happened is the heat's been taken out of that fridge to make it cold. And that's how an air source heat pump works in reverse. It takes the heat out of the air outside, utilizes that energy. Therefore, you don't have to heat the water temperature up that much. So it will extract 10, 11 degrees out of the air. So it's only having to work a small amount to raise that temperature up to, say, 20 degrees to provide a good internal temperature. The radiators never get boiling hot. That's the other thing with gas central heating. Sometimes the radiators really get hot. With an air source heat pump, they don't. They only go to around about 55 degrees, but they're on all the time. They maintain a nice steady temperature throughout the house. Occasionally, you may have to have radiators upsized because with them not running really hot, you may well end up having some that may be changed to a 4-foot single to a 4-foot double. But other than that, it utilizes the same pipe width that you have with your gas boiler. The other thing you will have to have is a cylinder, and they provide this insulated, highly insulated cylinder for your hot water as well, because obviously it's not a combi boiler, so it won't provide hot water. It's purely for the heating. So you have this highly insulated cylinder with an immersion heater on there as well, and it also uses the heat that comes from the air source heat pump to run through that cylinder to heat that water temperature up. But if you go on to night tariffs now, you can find some very cheap electricity throughout the night, which is as little as 10, 12 pence a kilowatt hour. I personally utilize that energy overnight to heat my solar water up. So I've got a full tank of water in the morning for sort of washing up and showers, etc. So they're the 4 main grants. I see I'm up to my limit. If anybody wants to ask any questions, please do. I will send Adrian a copy of the slide deck as well, so he's got that. I haven't actually clicked through because I tend to wobble on, but hopefully you've taken some information on board. Any questions, feel free to ask me now, or I can answer them in the chat.
Paul, that was brilliant. Thank you. You went through a lot of detail in a short amount of time, so I appreciate that. If you can send on the slides, I'll share them with the group. Can I start with one question and then we can open it to everyone else?
Yep.
I think all those grants you mentioned, do you access them as a householder through your energy provider? Is that right?
Not necessarily. That's one route through. They will help you for sure, but you can just source it through the internet. It starts the process off. I would tend to go through your energy supplier rather than going through one of these sort of private companies, because they're not always as necessarily as scrupulous as the energy providers. Best to go through the energy providers. The other thing to consider is all these the energy measures have to be MCS accredited as well. So anybody that says I'll put your air source heat pump in it, if they're not MCS accredited, don't go there because you won't get that grant. So MCS accreditation, micro generation scheme is very important. But yeah, start with your energy provider for sure.
All right, super duper. I've got a few other questions, but does anyone else want to ask questions first? Go on, Mick.
First, yeah, I'm very interested in the GBIS scheme, but my house is an old like 1850s or something stone-built terrace house, a traditional Calderdale sort of thing. Yeah. It's obviously it's really, really energy inefficient. To be honest, I'm surprised it's managed to get as far as grade D, but there you go. Anyway, it's got, as you would imagine, basically no insulation, and it's also got no loft space. By the way, I have had a retrofit report done, but didn't really look at grants. I was wondering whether GBIS could do anything at all for a property like mine, because installing any insulation is a relatively big job in a place like mine.
No, unfortunately not. They like it as simple as possible, I'm afraid. They just want lofts. Anything with a sloping roof, they don't get involved with taking plasterboard off the walls or anything like that. Unfortunately, they should do. It's the same with cavity wall insulation. They won't remove any existing cavity wall and put new stuff back. It's straightforward, easy 6-inch loft insulation in the loft and a nice loft hatch, unfortunately. And I know a lot of properties that, like yourselves, just don't fall into this category. It's very frustrating.
The worst
at the
ones.
moment, no. I know, but it does sound a nice property, though.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mick. Oscar.
Hello. Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Hi, Oscar. Hi.
Hi. Just a couple of questions. Hopefully, a simple one first. I'm due to move into a Victorian property, hopefully very soon. And so you're saying that under floorboards insulation, is that not so much worth it?
I mean, it can be. What we're saying is around about 15% goes through your floor. So obviously, if you can save yourself 15%, I mean, you're not going to save it all. I think the easiest fix, by far the easiest fix, is loft. The second easiest fix is walls, and then floors as a third, really. It is intrusive. It means taking all your floorboards up, you can imagine. But if you haven't moved in there yet, possibly there is potential. If there's a cellar underneath as well, it can be retrofitted underneath. But yeah, they do these hanging baskets where they drop the insulation in between the joists. But you know, success-wise, I don't know. I certainly wouldn't go. I'd prefer just to do a nice, good quality underlay. Maybe not have polished floorboards and have an underlay, but that might well spoil the character. I'm not sure.
Yeah, on your point now, I think it will be a floorboard restoration job. Yeah. So that's obvious, but then obviously you're losing the heat. So I was just wondering, and is that kind of thing covered under GBIS or not?
No, they don't touch floors at all. They don't touch, well, no, or Eco4, nobody touches floors at all. This was just mentioning to yourselves if people wanted to finance it themselves. There's no grants at all for insulating floors at all.
All right, thanks. And just to follow on from that, and it's one that's very live at the moment because we've just had our level 3 survey back. Do you have any comment on a monoflex membrane being used in a Victorian property as on the roof?
Not sure what that...
polythene non-breathable sheet.
I'm not suitably qualified. I mean, I know what a non-breathable. I like breathable underfelt. I have to say, I don't know. I don't think I'm suitably qualified to say that. Ideally, I know that timber does need ventilation. That's critical. If timber does need ventilation, otherwise you'll get damp and you'll get worm, etc. So ventilation is key in a roof, particularly. So I don't know the situation of your particular property, so can't really say.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's not looking good, to be honest. So,
right.
But, yeah, I think it's all going to have to come off. But I just didn't know if you've kind of experienced anything like that.
No, I haven't. I'm sorry.
Assessments. All right, no problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oscar. Paul, we've got a question in the chat. Are there any grant schemes, support for actually getting an EPC? Because I think, how much are they these days?
I mean, I've been charging sort of 70, 75 quid. No, I don't. There aren't really. But if a property comes under measures, we can actually come out and do them free of charge. But it would have to be an EF or G property. So essentially what we do, we come out and do an assessment, a rough assessment. We wouldn't lodge the assessment, but we'd say, okay, this is coming out as an EF or G. Let's say it's coming out as an F. We would then pass it on to the government contractor, who would then come out and do a proper retrofit assessment of that property. And obviously this is the guy that's going to make the money out of it. He's not going to make it out of you. He's going to make it out of the government. So he'll say, right, that's great. I'm going to put you insulation in. I'm going to put you a new boiler in, and he will get paid 20, 30, 40 grand for doing this work. So it's in his interest to have a low property, say an F, and raise it up to a C, because he gets more money dependent on how many points he lifts that particular property. So if he was only raising it from, say, a D to a C, he wouldn't get as much money as if he raised it from a G to an A, as an extreme example. So it's in his interest to offer you, and he will come back and offer you what he can do for you to get it as high as possible. So it's in your interest for that. But at the same time, he's going to make as much money as he can. So he's going to offer you everything to get it up to a good standard, because he gets paid for each point he raises that EPC value, if you know what I mean. But as regards grants, he won't charge you for the grant. We wouldn't charge you for it wouldn't be an EPC, it'd be a energy assessment. If we think that property, we wouldn't charge you for that, as long as you were reasonably local. And we'd take it from there, and we'd pass you over to the government assessor that would come out and do the retrofit assessment. So it's a little bit vague, but yeah, we'd have a look at the property for you and come back to you on that one.
We're mostly based in West Yorkshire, so I don't know where you're based, Paul.
We're in the Midlands. Yeah.
All right, okay. How would people in West Yorkshire sort of start that process of understanding or accessing or getting a quote for getting an EPC?
So, I mean, you can have a look. You can type in the government portal and go find my EPC, and then have a look for assessors. And it will. You put your postcode in, it will tell you the nearest EPC assessor to your property, and it'll come up with 8 to 10 names. That's how people find me. They just type in their postcode, and if I'm just down the road, my name will come up as an Elmhurst assessor, and they'll get me to come out and do an assessment. And I say it could cost 60, 70, 80 pounds. to me, that's nothing when it comes to knowing. You'll have up-to-date knowledge about your property. You'll have up-to-date knowledge of what you can do to improve that property. So to me, it's money well spent as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, normally when I'm doing EPCs, people are moving house. So they're not really interested in me telling them how to save energy in their house because they're going anyway. So it's frustrating for me in some cases. But yeah, I'd sort of recommend that people maybe have an updated EPC when they get a chance.
Okay, brilliant. There's a couple of chats going on in the chat, so I'll come back to that in a minute. Doug, do you want to ask your question first? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on the mute, sorry. Just quickly, I've just been looking at my EPC and there's a whole load of things in there that I never saw in the original EPC. I don't know why that is, but it's claiming that I don't have TRVs, which I do, and I have done ever since I moved into that house. And secondly, it was saying that that if I had a room thermostat as well, I could potentially make reasonable savings. Now, my question is, I've never had a room thermostat. Actually, I do, because I've got one of these electronic things. So that's effectively a room thermostat for the room that it's located in. It's a bit like a small alarm clock. You can cart it around any room. It's not wall mounted. But I've also always had the TRVs. So what's the I don't know what the question is now. I seem to have both, but the EPC implies I don't.
It sounds to me there's been a lot of drive-by EPCs. I mean, I'm not saying this particular one was, but I've been in a house today and taken 48 photographs. I've been there best part of 3/4 of an hour, measuring everything. Now, some people would look at a house and could, put some things in a box and could get you an EPC. It's very difficult. You need to have a good registered EPC assessor to do that and make sure he does record everything. Like everything else, we do get some bad eggs that people have, they just want an EPC because it's essentially a certificate to be able to sell their house. Some people do miss stuff, but we do have people as well that go in and just guess it, really. But
look, I've got a name if you want it.
No,
I can put her on.
No, but you should have put TRVs. They won't make a massive difference to your EPC. The key one would be your boiler. That's up to 8-9 points. Your loft insulation is 3, 4, 5 points. Cavity walls can make a difference of 5 or 6 points, and these are big numbers when it comes to the average house in the UK is 60. So if you get it to a 70, you're up to a C. So I don't do many C properties, most D, E, Fs, and Gs. So TRV is normally pretty standard. To be fair, I'm surprised I didn't pick that up, but I don't know.
Okay, thanks for that.
Can people apply to have their EPCs amended, Paul?
You can, but to be honest, you'd be better having a new one. For how much it costs, and get somebody to come around and make sure he does everything right, and make sure you tell him all the dates. That's another key point with an EPC. If you've got dates of when windows were installed, because currently if I look at a window and the customer says, they were done last year, I can't put that in my document. I have to date that before 2020. Now, if you've got an invoice that says they were bought in 2021, that's great. Then that gives you an extra point. And same with composite doors. I actually can't say that that's a composite door, even though it is. They won't allow me to do that unless you've got an invoice that said it's a composite door. Stupid, because I know what a composite door was. I used to fit them. It's frustrating for me. But on the EPC, unless I've got evidential proof, I can't actually put it. So the more information you've got, if you have an EPC assessment, the better.
Fantastic. Right, we're rounding up to the hour. There's a little bit of debate going on in the chat around the topic around heating or leaving your heating on low all day. Some people are saying that they've read that there's some disagreement depending on your property. And I think Mick's gone on to give us a bit more detail. My house is very inefficient to heat and never really gets above 18 degrees with the heating on in winter. To maintain it lower than 15 to 16 degrees, as you suggested, the boiler would be running all the time. I find it hard to see how that would save energy. So is it property reliant?
Well, in some ways it does, but it would be ticking over. It wouldn't be burning massive amount of gas just to maintain 15 degrees, to be fair. It's going to be cold, whatever, unfortunately, but it has been proved for the average property, it will overall be better to leave it on long and low, because what will happen in his house, if it is cold, it's going to be even colder, and then he's going to need to have the temperature even higher to try and maintain the decent body temperature. He's got to look at, it's obviously cost and everything else, but he's got to look at these things, making sure curtains are closed, curtains are tucked behind radiators, little things like this that all help. But if it's a solid wall property, they do get very cold in winter. And we all remember how cold it was the last couple of years. But yeah, it's just different. It is just difficult.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. I'm going to round off with a couple more rapid fire questions, unless anyone else has got anything else to ask. No. Okay, cool. You talked about humidity of rooms. Is there a target humidity for rooms in your house?
I don't think so. I don't know the levels. I just know that, you know, to try and, if you've got moist air in there, you've got kettles going all the time and steam from boilers, whatever, to make sure that that is extracted as quick as possible. We know you can smell, when I go into some houses, you can sort of smell damp, moist in the air itself. So just make sure it's ventilated and you've got ventilation in. And also I do feel the wall, and actually it makes a massive difference when you feel wall. Some actually do feel damp and really cold. You've got to keep ventilation in there. Keep it decent ventilation is very important, but I haven't got an actual level.
Okay, thank you. Cavity walls, once you've had them done once, can you have them done more than, well, again?
No, I mentioned before, I think, that you can't, they won't extract what's already in there now. You can get these guys going around with these thermo heater things that they can actually identify, but maybe you shouldn't do that, because you'll start to see patches appear under the windows, you know, where you see the heating going through the walls. When it was initially done, it's like everything else, it was done very inefficiently. The modern day insulation now is so much better. It fills up every void. Whereas I've had instances where, you know, you're looking under your kitchen unit and suddenly all polystyrene balls come running out, you know, things like this, in energy service boxes outside and things like this. It wasn't done as good as it is done now. So the modern day cavity wall insulation is far better, but no, extracting existing is something that you would have to finance yourself.
But would it be worth it? Because do those polystyrene balls degrade over time?
They did. Well, polystyrene doesn't degrade. It will outlast your house. What
True.
happens is it settles. It does settle over time, and you will get gaps. That's the problem, and that causes bridges in your heating, so that bridges in moisture content in your walls. So you may see some damp patches occurring where there's a bit of the thermal bridge has been passed through. So obviously everybody knows sort of heat and cold, at some point those temperatures will cross and will cause a dew point. It's where that dew point is. It could cause a dew point inside the cavity and could cause what you think is rising damp. It isn't always necessarily rising damp. Sometimes it's gaps in the insulation where moisture has been formed on the surface of the wall inside. So yeah, it would be good, but I don't want to make people paranoid into thinking they've got gaps, you know. If they've got no problems, then leave it as it is. But yeah, if there are issues, consider cavity wall, maybe having a look at having a thermal imaging camera to see if there are any gaps.
All right, brilliant, thank you. Last question from Oscar. What is an average cost of upgrading to an air source heat pump system, considering upgrades required to radiators, etc.?
So I've heard it as little as £2,500. Depends on the size of the property. Obviously, when I had mine done, I had to find £5,500, but I only got the £5,000 grant. So my price was £10,500. Now, since 2 years ago, the grant has gone up to £7,500, and also the cost to install has come down. So that differential now is quite small. In some cases, I've known one person pay £1,000. But obviously others are paying £2,000, £3,000, £4,000. But then when you consider a brand new combi boiler would cost you maybe £2,000 plus, you know, there isn't that much difference now. And this is why it's such a worthwhile scheme. And over a longer period of time, I will say this, that those grants are going to come down, because once people start to take up these air source heat pumps, because we are going down the route of air source heat pumps, the grants will come down, and the homeowner will have to find more and more money for that, to have that work done. So at the moment, I think they're as generous as they're going to get, and over time, I think they will come down. So yeah, probably £2,500, £3,000 difference, but to me, well worth it.
All right, brilliant insight. My last question is, all this new tech we're talking about, so ASHPs, solar batteries, are they improving your EPC score yet, or is that still out in consultation?
They do. They certainly improve the air source heat pump. They've got to put all the models into the data. But when I put solar, if anybody's got solar panels, the few occasions that I've put the solar system in, it's knocked it up 5 or 6 points. It's quite surprising, actually. Air source heat pumps is roughly the same as a combi boiler, a brand new combi boiler, but they should be more. The problem with air source heat pumps is they are 400% efficient machine. A gas boiler is 92%. The difference is 4 times. So you think that's 4 times the saving. The trouble is electricity is 4 times the cost of gas. That's the problem. But over time, I do believe electricity will come down. The more wind we have, the more solar we have, the more off-grid we become, solar will get cheaper and cheaper. And I think long-term, electricity prices will come down. Gas prices, at the moment, they're not separating them because unfortunately, everything is linked to the gas price. Electricity prices are artificially high. That's why people are investing in solar wind farms, because they're getting all this money back. They're getting more money than they're actually generating because the tariff is the same as the gas. But when they split that tariff, electricity prices will come down and gas will go up, I think. So yeah, long term, electricity will fall. Air source heat pumps will become even more efficient, and solar panels definitely a way forward.
All right. Insightful. Thank you very much. We're top of the hour. Has anyone got any last minute questions before we wrap? I don't think so. So thank you very much, Paul. And we look forward to seeing your slides, and I'll share them on with the rest of the team here. Thank you very much for your time, Paul.
Okay, Adrian. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.